When you can't make it to City Hall or the school board meetings, local journalists from Duluth News-Tribune will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at DuluthNewsTribune.com.
Hello, Northlanders. It's Friday, September 20th. I'm Wyatt Buckner, the Duluth News-Tribune Minute, presented by Minnesota Power Employees Credit Union.
The average MPECU member saves over $785 a year in better rates and lower fees. And with MPECU, every ATM is your ATM. With their free checking program, you get ATM fee reimbursements at any ATM anywhere in the U.S. Check out Minnesota Power Employees Credit Union services online at mpecu.com or visit their offices in downtown Duluth, Arrowhead Road, or Miller Trunk Highway.
It's Friday and you're looking for some fun things to do this weekend. Duluth News-Tribune arts and entertainment reporter Jay Gabler has some options in this week's Best Bets.
Prost! Happy Oktoberfest season. Now, I know it's going to sound a little funny for our Duluth listeners because the big Duluth October Festival with the tent down at Bayfront Festival Park was last weekend. But now Oktoberfest season has officially begun over in Germany, and here in the Northland there are plenty more opportunities to enjoy German-style entertainment, music, and, if you so choose, beer. Let's start with Ursa Minor Brewing, spreading its fest across 4 days, each with a theme. Last night, Thursday, was Pride Day. Now today, Friday, there's going to be a beer Olympics, so you can use that floor routine if you didn't make it to the Summer Olympics this year. Then tomorrow, Saturday, the 21st, is a classic Oktoberfest. So, think about Stein holding, that kind of thing. And then Sunday is going to be a family day with tie-dyeing and a visit from Laura Loons, local balloon legend. Also in Lincoln Park, there's Bent Paddle's Flannel Fest. Not so much an Oktoberfest theme celebration, but it's a fest, it's a fall, kind of in the spirit. Bent Paddle Brewing's Flannel Fest is an opportunity to leave the lederhosen at the cleaners and don your comfiest shacket. Tomorrow, Saturday, the event celebrates everything from grunge to country to Americana and all the meaningful moments in between, according to an event description. Live bands are going to represent each of those three genres, and although tubas will be in short supply unless Hattie Peach surprises us, the shindig will have the feel of a classic fall festival. The brewery promises beer poking, quote-unquote, fireside shenanigans, whatever that means to you, and brews including Bent Paddle's own party lager, as they call it, Munchin' Pretzels. Then, Sunday, if Sunday is your party day, Blacklist has got you covered. Blacklist Brewing in downtown Duluth built its reputation on Belgian brews, and Belgium shares a border with Germany, so there you go. No further justification needed. The downtown Duluth Brewery is celebrating with some live music on Sunday, hosting a double bill, headlined by a proudly chaotic, their word, folk punk band called the Dreadnoughts. But first up is Winzigehosen. I'm mostly German ethnically, so I should do better at that, but I still have to apologize. I did not grow up speaking German, so I'm trying to channel my DNA here. Winzigehosen. Anyway, this is a band whose biography asks, have you ever wondered what would happen if Gogo Bordello had a date with Frankie Yankovic in a beer? Well, if the accordionist's face looks familiar in this band, it's because that is Blacklist head brewer Brian Schanzenbach. That is Sunday at Blacklist Brewing in Duluth. For more information on these and other best bets for the week, check out DuluthNewsTribune.com. I'm Jay Gabler.
Earlier this week, the News-Tribune and the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce hosted a candidate forum at the Garden in Canal Park. In our final installment, we'll hear from the candidates hoping to replace Representative Liz Olson, who resigned. In Western Duluth's Minnesota House District 8A, DFLer Pete Johnson and Republican Mark McGrew took turns answering the moderators' questions. We'll also hear from District 8B incumbent Elish Kozlowski and their challenger, Sean Savala.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back for those of you, they gave me the really loud mic. Welcome back for those of you who are back. Welcome to those of you who are joining us. On behalf of the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber Foundation, and the Duluth News-Tribune, our partners here for the next couple of days, we really appreciate you making the time and joining us this morning. We're going to introduce the candidates in just a minute, but thank you both for making the time. We know you're busy. This is a big deal for both our residents as well as the Chamber and the DNT, so thank you for doing this. Thank you to our staff and the DNT staff for helping make this possible. possible. Thank you for the garden for hosting us. I know if you were here last time, you heard all this before, but we do want to say this before every forum, that this is civility certified. So as you walked in, you received just kind of a handout about what that means. We ask that you please keep your applause and any kind of comments to the end, if you would, please. We've got about 45 minutes. We want to try to keep as close to time as possible, give these gentlemen an opportunity to let us know their values, their priorities. This is not meant to be a contentious debate. This is an informational forum, and we're going to try to leave another 15 minutes at the end of this until our final forum at 11 o'clock, so that if they are willing, if an opportunity to meet with the candidates afterwards. So with that said, I'll pitch it over to Chuck.
Thanks, Dan. On behalf of the News Tribune, welcome to our candidates for District 8A, the race to replace Representative Liz Olson in Western Duluth, Pete Johnson and Mark McGrew. Thank you for everyone who's here. And candidates, I want to point out Kathy Burnt in the front row here. She is our timekeeper. She'll hold up signs to let you know when your time is nearing its end and when it's come up, and we appreciate your being respectful of the times. We'll offer a minute at the outset for opening statements, a minute and a half at the end for closing remarks, and then answers are a minute each, and then we'll offer opportunities for rebuttals, responses, things like that. If you feel like you need more time, give me a little wave, give me a little nod, something, and we'll try to be accommodating as best we can. As Dan said, we have 10 questions. If we don't get to all of them, maybe we don't get to all of them, but hopefully we have a good discussion, a good chance for voters to hear from both of you directly, and for you to speak directly to the electorate. The important decisions being made on November 5th, of course, in our election is election day. Early voting starts on Friday, so this is actually very, very timely. We will begin this forum by offering you each a chance to just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running and hoping to represent Western Duluth and St. Paul. We flipped a coin. Pete Johnson, you'll get to go first. Please get us started.
Yeah, my name is Pete Johnson. A little bit about me and why I'm running. I've been a firefighter for the last going on 23 years, 19 of those years serving the folks here in Duluth. The vast majority of that time actually responding within the district that I'm hoping to represent. My wife's an elementary school teacher. I got a couple of daughters in middle school. Those are the big drivers for me as to why I'm running, is just taking that perspective of what I've seen over the years, responding to folks when they're at some of their most vulnerable times, when they don't have time to clean up the kitchen or put on a clean shirt. Seeing the experience that my wife and daughters have as they take their different paths through our educational system. Also been a union officer for over 16 years. Take those skills and that perspective with me as well, and hopefully make a difference for working folks here in the district and ultimately move us forward in the state. So thank you.
Thanks, Pete. I should mention Pete's the DFL candidate. The Republican candidate is Mark McGrew. Mark?
Thank you, Chuck. So my name is Mark McGrew. I'm a lifelong Duluthian, born and raised in Piedmont Heights. I'm actually living in the house that I grew up in right now. I purchased it after we moved my parents into assisted living. I come to you with 28 years in law enforcement. I just retired in April from the Minnesota State Patrol. So I worked 24 and a half years with the patrol out of the Duluth station. And prior to that, I was a police officer in the city of Superior for 3.5 years. I also served in the United States Navy Reserve for nearly 24 years. And I bring some experience here that I think is similar to Pete in public service, where I met people at difficult times, and I'm running because I want to hold the government accountable, fiscally responsible. I've seen massive waste and spending in the last few years, so thank you.
Thank you both very much. Dan?
Thank you both, and thank you both for your public service. We're going to begin with question 1 of 10. If elected to this position, what would be your top priorities, and what specifically would you want to accomplish for your District 8A? We'll start with Mark.
I think fiscal responsibility, like I just mentioned, the legislature last session spent $17.5 billion in a matter of 5 months. That's a billion with a B. I think we need to be able to curb spending and bring down, which will hopefully help with inflation, because spending isn't tied directly to inflation. In addition, they passed they're building a $750 million new office building in St. Paul, while people are struggling to meet ends meet. So that's a big deal. And also there's a scandal that not many people, when I've been door knocking, know about is called Feeding Our Future. It's where $250 million was doled out to a non-existent company, and they didn't even have a building, from my understanding. So the Office of Legislative Auditor came up with major warning signs that they should have caught this stuff before all this stuff went through and all this money was doled out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Pete?
Yeah, the top priorities for me kind of go back to that service as a firefighter and some of my life experiences. A lot of the things that we get called to are rooted somewhere else. Like, I look over the course of my career, the Duluth Fire Department, when I got hired, was running between 5,000 and 6,000 calls a year. This year, we're going to be pushing between 16,000 and 17,000 calls. It's not 10,000 more fires or 10,000 more car accidents or 10,000 more heart attacks. It's folks doing what I taught my kids to do. If you're in trouble, if you need help, if you don't know what to do, call 911. Somebody's going to show up and try to help you. But so many of the things that we're getting called to is not something I can solve in a couple minutes I have with somebody sitting in their living room or on the street. There are issues that are tied to housing. There are issues that are tied to education. There are issues that are tied to healthcare. And there are issues that are tied to good paying jobs. So those are going to be my focuses. I really feel that by focusing on those four key pieces, we'll be able to lift everybody up, including those who are solidly in the middle class, as well as those folks on the margins.
Thank you both.
Thanks. As you both know, the Senate, the House, the Governor's Office, all controlled right now by the DFL. Our question is, are you willing to rise above party politics if you're elected for the good of your constituents? And how can voters be assured that yours will be a voice of compromise and cooperation? That's assuming you want it to be. Pete Johnson, we'll begin with you.
Again, when we respond to somebody, we don't look what yard signs they have in their yard and determine how or why we're going to help them. If one of our constituents or somebody within our region comes to me looking for help as a legislator, we're going to figure out how to help them. It's the same principles that I use as a union officer. Like I said, I've been a union officer for 16 years, both at the state and the local level. Our membership is a snapshot of society. We have folks who are on the far left, we have folks who are on the far right, we have folks that are solidly in the middle, and we have folks that don't really care. But you have to figure out a way to represent everybody. This isn't this total sum game where if somebody disagrees with you on one thing, you're going to create an enemy out of them forever. You might not be able to work together on one issue, but you should be able to turn around and work together on other issues. And I'm going to take those same skills that I've developed working with firefighters, working with administrations to figure out how we can get the most work done, because creating those relationships is ultimately going to benefit us as a region into the future, because that DFL trifecta probably isn't always going to be there.
Thanks. Mark McGrew.
I would definitely work across party lines and build bipartisanship. I think it's very important to do that, even if one group has control of the legislature. We need to be able to work together for the people of our district and of our state. It's very important that we make Minnesota the best place possible for people to live and visit, and the safest place possible as well. And I like with Pete here, when I would go to a crash, as far as like a motor vehicle crash on the freeway, I didn't care who was there. We just dealt with the situation. There were probably times when I didn't agree with the person politically, but that didn't matter. I would always reach out a best hand and give that person support and help in whatever I could do. Thank you.
Thank you both. As a way of just following up, I'm wondering if you could each cite just maybe one example of a compromise that you made and what you had to give up in order to achieve a larger good. Pete?
Sure.
I know that puts you on the spot a little bit. I apologize. But.
No, I appreciate the question. I've negotiated a lot of contracts with firefighters unions, both locally and across the state. I've gone into each one of those negotiations with a binder that's 2 or 3 inches thick of the things that I want to accomplish for my members, knowing full well that that's not what it's going to look like when I walk out. So it's figuring out, having those conversations with the folks who are sitting across from you on what they're willing to work on, what you're willing to work on, and then focusing on those ultimately to bring something back that's acceptable to both sides. It's how you negotiate. It's a skill that I've been using for going on 2 decades of working with folks and our membership are the same way. We have to be able to not just pick what benefits certain members more than others, but focusing on what does the greatest good for the greatest number of folks.
Mark, a specific example if you can.
Well, I, like Pete, I was a union delegate for the Minnesota State Patrol Troopers Associations, and we would have to go into negotiations. So that's where you have to do things like that as well, reach across lines and work with other people. But I look at education as well. I come from a family of educators. Both my parents were worked in the school district here in Duluth, and my wife is also an education teacher. She teaches over at UWS. But I think you need to be able, like education, if you're going to throw money into education, which I'm not opposed to, but make sure it goes to different places, like the trades, for instance. We need to bring the trades back up, and I know Natalie Zalesnikar, Representative Zalesnikar, has done a lot of work for the trades, and I support that effort, and I think we need to continue to do that bipartisan work where you can maybe are focused on one topic, education, but then you can narrow it down within that to work together.
Good. Thank you, Dan.
That's a good segue to question 3, which is about the state budget and specifically the surplus last year. If you are elected to this position, how would you view the state surplus? Again, knowing it's going to change from year to year. Last year there was a surplus, and again there was an increase in spending, about 40% increase in overall state government. What's your thoughts on that? And if you are elected down in the state legislature, how would you handle that issue going forward? Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, I think that just says something. When you have a $17.5 billion surplus and it gets spent within 5 months, the growth of government has been enormous this past legislative session. So I think we need to be able to bring that down. And like Mr. Fanning said, the growth of government increased by 40%. That's huge. That's unbelievable. And with that, Minnesota also created a new Department of Children, Youth, and Families to support childcare and early learning opportunities. I think that that's something that could have been handled maybe by Department of Education or Department of Health and Human Services. I don't know why we had to create another another group of government entities there. But I would look into the fiscal responsibility there of government and crack down on the fraud to hopefully get some money back into the system that we can use for viable programs.
Thanks, Mark. Pete?
Yeah, that surplus was historic. And there was a lot, people talked about it being spent or it being wasted or the parts of it that were abused and taken fraudulently, and that is a problem and that does need to be addressed. But I also look at the things that we as a state got accomplished with that. My wife knows right away which kids in her classroom are not eating meals when they're at home. She knows which kids aren't sleeping in the same bed when they're at home. So the fact that now any kid can come into school and get breakfast and lunch is a huge deal, and it's very good for every kid in our state. The emergency relief fund got refunded after it had been depleted. So when we had the flooding and the storms, we didn't have to go anywhere else. We were able to use that fund to help folks in those communities right away. There was public safety money that came back to communities like Duluth that we used for our fire department, that we used for our police department. You saw increases in LGA, which in Duluth is critical to us to be able to do our jobs and run our city the way that we want.
Great, thank you both.
Thanks. Staying on the topic of state finances and budgeting, a bonding bill, of course, in an even number of years, it's kind of supposed to be the whole focus of the session, didn't get done. I'm curious, in your gentlemen's minds, who's to blame or what went wrong, I guess would be a better way of saying it, and what were the biggest misses for District 8A? And Pete, we'll start with you, sorry.
When you get put up against a hard timeline like that and a bonding bill that needs more than just a 50% vote to pass, I'm guessing it got knocked off the table. And again, to what Mark Munger had said, it wasn't there in those rooms and part of those conversations. But when there's as contentious as it is, going back to one of the first questions about figuring out how we actually work together to deliver for people, not just in Duluth, but across Minnesota. What we missed out on were some of the priorities that we set here in our region. We missed out on bonding to fix the aerial lift bridge, which is in need of repair. We missed out on new hangars for the 148th. which granted that isn't necessarily in District 8A, but the guard base has a tremendous economic impact on the entire region and is a huge asset for us to have here. Again, the control tower for the airport, Spirit Valley Community Center, things like that provide great services to the community, but also put folks to work in those areas.
Good, thank you. Mark McGrew?
I think we saw the division within the Democrat Party last legislative session at the end of it there with all the wrangling that was going around and the division within their own party there. They had difficulty coming to agreement on different things. And I think that's where you need to reach across the aisle and say, let's do this, and because it's going to better our communities. So I think that the divisions within the Democrat Party, and there are some in the Republican Party, I'm not going to say we're perfect, but at the same time, I think that we need to be able to bring those things home to our people, like the Airlift Bridge and like the 148th. I'm a huge veteran supporter, being a vet myself as well, and if we can get additional funds for our veterans up at the air base, I am all about that, so thank you.
Just real quickly as a follow-up, if you're elected, I'm going to ask each of you, if you're elected, would you support a bonding bill this year? Pete?
You're just looking for a yes or no?
Pretty much, and why or why not?
Absolutely. Those bonding bills are huge for improving infrastructure, whether that be roads and bridges, whether it be water treatment centers, whether it be dealing with runoff issues. Not only do those things deliver needed infrastructure improvements to the regions, but those jobs put people to work. And when they're done with project labor agreements, those are good union paid jobs. Whether they're union or not, they are paying a living wage that drives the economy in our region. And when you're building the middle class with good jobs like that have the benefits that we need, that allow people to drive their own economies, that's a huge win. So I absolutely support getting as much bonding and bringing as much of that back to our region as I possibly can in 2025.
Thanks, Mark.
I would support bonding as well. Again, it brings monies into the region and helps stimulate the economy, helps build jobs. I would even, I would look at getting, we don't know, of course, what's on the bonding bill yet. Maybe it'll be the same stuff, maybe it won't be. But I would look at homeless shelters too and try to get some bonding for homelessness. I know Stepping On Up has a program going on that they're trying to get up and running here. And I know they've been given some monies from both the county and the city. And if we can, tie some more state money to that and get some kind of a shelter here going for the people so we can reduce this homeless problem, I would be all about that and trying to help those people out.
Thank you both very much. Dan?
Just a quick time check. We're halfway through the questions at question 5 and halfway through our time, so we were right on time. So great job, guys. We'll keep at it. Question 5 is around education. You both mentioned having some family connections on education, so I'm sure you know this issue well. But particularly with public education, some of our schools were left with a financial crunch when some of the pandemic funds dried up. There was an investment, a little bit more investment in education last year. Do you feel that was enough? Should there be more? Should there be less? Generally, what's your general thoughts? If you're elected, how would you handle public education funding next session? Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, I think that there's always places to put money in education. There was definitely a historic amount of money that was put into it last year or last session. So I think that we need to look at the overall budget, because I don't want to obviously go into a deficit. So I don't want us to be into a deficit. But coming from parents that were in education, and my wife again, and I even actually attended the 1983 Duluth teachers strike, and I think that was the last time the teachers actually struck in Duluth. So I think we need to bring local control back to the school districts and then give parental empowerment as well. It's hard to legislate things that might be good in Minneapolis, but they might not be good in Duluth or Proctor. So we need to give them money, but give them money and let the local school boards handle that money and use it however they feel is needed, and not tie so many mandates to it.
Thank you, Mark. Pete?
Our schools in Minnesota have been chronically underfunded for decades. You even look at the investments that have made in the last few years, and our per pupil funding is the highest it's ever been. But even with the inflationary issues over the last 20 years, they're still underfunded. And one of the problems that leads to is cities, smaller communities that don't necessarily have the property tax base or things like that to have robust funding for their schools. They have to go back for referendums. And I think that's a terrible way to try and fund our schools. It does not get them the resources that they need, which trickles down to the teachers, which trickles down to the support staff, and ultimately has a huge impact on the students. But the other thing to remember too is education makes up almost a third of the state budget. And anytime that we make any small adjustments in that pendulum swings pretty far at the bottom. So making sure that when we're making those investments, they are truly having the intended impacts that they're supposed to have. And I don't necessarily agree that that's sole management by school boards. I don't necessarily have a problem with some of the mandates because that forces the money to go where it's supposed to go.
Great, thank you both.
Thanks. As you both know, Duluth and Western Duluth, your district, struggling to create housing that's affordable to all income levels, not just low-income housing. What should the legislature do? What would you do as a legislator to try to encourage the creation of more housing statewide? Pete Johnson, we'll start with you.
It's a tough one in a minute. I was on Center City Housing's board for 9 years. They're a local nonprofit that does a ton of work in the low-income, no-income public housing sector. And one of the things that I saw over the years I was with them is that when we focus on housing, it's more than just units. It's the support that's tied to those units, and whether that's mental health support, whether it's physical health support, whether it's childcare, whether it's a controlled door for 24 hours, that has a huge impact on those folks remaining stably housed, which has huge impacts further down the line. When we talk about the middle of our housing, the market rate side of things, looking at those public-private partnerships, looking at helping with funding and rebuilding on some of these vacant lots and some of these condemned properties. We see what happens when those lots get overgrown. We see what happens when those properties are not upkept. They draw in trouble. And the last piece that we haven't really talked about much is senior housing. Right now, there's not very many places for older folks to go to downsize out of the houses that they raise their families in, which creates a bottleneck at the top. So focusing on those three things would be a priority.
Thanks. Mark McGrew on housing.
Well, on a positive note here, I just saw the other day when I drove by Harbor Highlands up on Central Entrance, there's one brand new building going up. So that's a good sign that we're making some steps forward in the housing problem. And I fully admit that there's a housing issue and housing crisis. Part of that has to do with high costs of homes, and a lot of that has to do with property tax and that type of thing. But I think overregulation is also to blame for the housing crisis. Some things that have to do with that would be sometimes people have to have 5 or 6 wetlands violations, on-site meetings. It's like, why do we need so many different aspects here of things going forward as far as regulation? I think we need to deregulate some of the housing things and move forward from there and be able to let people buy cheaper houses or build cheaper houses.
Thanks. Related to housing, I want to ask just real quickly, because someone brought up the Stepping On Up effort in Duluth. Homelessness, no one likes to see the encampments, and the folks who are in them have very real needs, very real challenges. Just kind of curious, just real quickly, I know I'm not going to ask you to solve homelessness in 1 minute, but if you would just share your thoughts real briefly. Pete?
Yeah, there's different levels there. The initial part is getting folks who are unhoused in somewhere safe and stable so that they can figure out what they actually need and get them connected with the resources. The longer term piece, make sure that you find housing that works for them and has those support services I just mentioned. A great example is the Birchwood Apartments. It's a mental health apartment that Center City operates up on Matterhorn Drive up there. In talking to some police officers, one of them was up there for a completely different issue, and the person working there showed them the resident list. And this officer was blown away. She recognized virtually every name on that list as somebody that they had regular contact with before. And because they were in the right type of housing with the right type of support, she thought those folks either died or moved away because she hadn't had any contact. Nobody had contact with them for the years that they had been living there. It is critical that when we talk about housing, we tie support to it, because that's how it becomes sustainable, that's how it becomes long-term, and that's how ultimately we deliver more for those folks.
Thanks. Mark, your thoughts on homelessness?
I think we need to look at the core issue behind homelessness. 67% of people currently that are homeless have some form of mental illness. So we need to get these people some help, let alone housing and that type of thing. But 1/3 of people who are homeless have problems with alcohol or drugs, and about 2/3 of these people have had lifetimes history of drug or alcohol abuse. So it's great to get people housing, but if we need to get them help in the core issues that are affecting their homelessness, which I believe are the mental health issues and the substance abuse issues. And I saw that myself. As a state trooper, I would have to go out and help MnDOT clear out camps when they were set up in places that MnDOT didn't want them anymore, or that they were creating a problem. And a lot of these people definitely had mental health issues, and they had substance abuse issues, finding needles and that type of thing during cleanup at these places. So I want to get people help, and I want to help them out, but they need to help themselves too, and we need to help them out by getting them some treatment.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation. Dan.
Question 7 is a bit of a follow-up on the housing issue, just talking about population growth and what the state can do in particular to help foster additional jobs and additional growth in this area. We see some population growth in places like Rochester and even parts of the Twin Cities. While we're seeing a little bit of progress in Duluth area, we know we can do even more. What role can the state play, assuming you're elected and goes down in this legislature? What job could you do at the state level to help us attract more industries, more jobs, and grow that population? That could be anything from permitting processes to immigration issues to, of course, jobs and housing, but just what role do you think the state could play to help build that population and those jobs? Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, I am endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Businesses, so I take pride in that. And I think one of the problems Minnesota has right now is that we have the highest corporate tax rate in the country at 9.8%. So, and then we had all these different mandates that came through on the last year when they passed earned safe and sick time, unpaid parenting leave. I'm not opposed to these things. However, if you're trying to attract business and you have the highest corporate tax rate and you have all these mandates on different companies and businesses that want to come here, why would they come to Duluth when they could go to Superior, Wisconsin across the bridge and maybe have lower tax rates and lower fees and all these other things, so mandates that are being put on them. So I think we need to look at that to enhance business growth within the state.
Thank you. Pete?
Again, this really goes back to those 4 key pieces. One is the education piece, and this goes even further back with childcare and with pre-K, ensuring that if folks that want to stay in the workforce, there's an affordable way for them to do that. I having our daughters when they were 2 and 4, it was almost unsustainable for us to have them in full-time daycare, with my wife being an attorney at the time and me being a firefighter. Changing that so that folks aren't using a huge portion of their income, and then improving our education system as we go through, so we're developing that next workforce. Because if the workers are here and they're highly skilled, they're highly trained, and they're highly motivated, that will draw those businesses in as well, regardless of the tax rates. They need to have workers to be successful, and if we can produce those best workers and keep them here, that's going to be a huge piece of that. And also there's the housing piece. If somebody comes and wants to move to Duluth, but they can't find a place to live that meets their needs, we're going to lose them. So if we still focus on those 4 key pieces of education, healthcare, jobs, and housing, we can draw more people in, which will keep those businesses coming.
Just a really quick follow-up. Specifically think about your district right now. There's a couple opportunities, some in the works, some potentially in the works. I think of the Amazon Distribution Center. I think of the work we're working with Selfadel right now with their potential expansion, tripling their footprint, doubling their workforce. That's not a done deal yet, but it's in the works as far as the potential goes. Are those the kind of issues you feel like the state could have a role? If you're elected as a legislature, would you be involved in those issues? Do you support those issues? Those are just a couple concrete examples off my head, but I know there's others as well. What role do you see you could play as a state legislature to help more things like that happen in the district? Mark?
I would absolutely be an advocate for bringing business to our town and our area here for sure. I mean, that's how you build a community, you grow the community, you build a tax base. The majority of Minnesota's taxes are brought in on income tax. So yes, you need to have those jobs, especially good paying jobs. And I would support that wholeheartedly, and I would make any effort I could to support that effort. But I still think that maybe looking at tax rates for corporate businesses and lowering those would be beneficial to not only help those businesses out, but maybe attract more spin-off businesses from that as well.
Thank you. Pete?
Yeah, I think that is a role the legislature plays. I think that's also a role that they play in working with folks like you at the Chamber of Commerce, as well as, you know, other of the people in our community. I had a good meeting with some of the folks from Essentia the other day, talking about the medical school and why they think that their site is the best site. But regardless of where that medical school goes, it needs to come to Duluth. And if we don't get together and figure that out, we're going to lose that to someplace like St. Cloud. I've had conversation with the folks at Sofadale. I think it is important to show that you're willing to have those conversations, but still advocate to make sure that when those expansions happen, those jobs are the kind of good jobs that are long and sustainable in our community, regardless of who that employer is. And so absolutely, I think that legislature does play a role in that.
Great, thank you both.
Thanks. Our next question is about copper nickel mining. You knew we'd ask about that, of course. Curious, I want to ask each of you, are you confident it can be done safely? Or are you among those who feel that it's so risky we don't even want to consider mining plans from any company? Pete Johnson, we'll start with you.
It's a little bit of both, right? I'm confident that there is a way that they could do it safely. Am I confident that somebody's going to do it that way? That I don't know. For me, what this boils down to is trust. I think, you know, I've got friends on the clean water side of this discussion. I've got friends on the labor side of this discussion, and for as long as I can remember, these folks have been pitted against each other. But having those conversations, both of them have the same issues when we talk about this, and it's trust. The folks on the labor side aren't going to trust one of those corporations to take care of their workers, to make sure that their wages and benefits are getting paid the way that they should, to make sure that their work conditions are safe, unless they have those contracts in place that they can enforce and they can uphold. And the folks on the clean water side are the same way. They want things in place to make sure that if it's done, it is done safely. It's not going to pollute, and if and when it does pollute, there's money set aside to make that cleanup so that we don't end up with more things like the Superfund site over in western Duluth that costs around $165 million to clean up.
Good, thank you. Mark.
I'm absolutely in favor of copper nickel mining. However, I do want it to be environmentally safe. So we need to make sure and ensure that proper safeguards are in place to do it. I think with us pivoting to the electric vehicles, that's the issue. And the batteries that are required in those vehicles. I think we need to be able to source that here and not in a different country somewhere else. I was out door knocking, and I ran into somebody that brought up this, and I said, do you want to do that in Minnesota where we have regulations, we have OSHA, probably the highest working standards around, or would you rather have that done in Africa where child labor is being used and no regulations, and the person said they'd rather have it done in Africa. So that's unfortunate. I think we should have it done here. We can monitor it. We have safeguards that we can put forth to prevent bad things from happening.
Thanks. Just 30 seconds, maybe more specifically, the Prove It First legislation that's been proposed. Are you a supporter, not a supporter? Why or why not? Just real quickly, Pete.
I'm not a supporter of the Prove It First legislation. I think putting something like that in place ends that conversation. I don't think it's a reality that it would get passed at the legislature. I think it sucks a lot of the air out of the room and takes away from the conversations that we need to have in order, if we're going to go forward, it meets the needs of both the folks on the clean water side as well as the folks we hope to have working up there.
Thanks, Mark.
Prove It First. I'm not as familiar with that, but I would imagine they want us to prove that it's safe, which I'm all for is proving that it's safe, and I think that can be done. I think that those create good paying jobs up in northern Minnesota. And not that I'm going to put the environment ahead of good paying jobs, but I think that the two can work together. So
Thank you both.
Question 9 around abortion and reproductive rights. As you know, there's been increased conversation around this since the Supreme Court ruling a couple years ago. Could you share your views on this issue and what role you could play as a state legislature if elected when you head to St. Paul around abortion and reproductive rights? Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm pro-life, so I'll put that out there right away. However, I think when the Supreme Court decision came down, I wish we could have all agreed that we could at least have had a Roe versus Wade standard in Minnesota. That's something I could actually vote for. I think that where we're at right now is that you have basically abortion up till, you have a choice to do an abortion up till the point of birth. And I think that that is on the same level as North Korea and China. And I think we need to draw that back, have a period of time during which a woman can make a choice, but at the same time there's a living, viable baby inside of that woman. And I think we need to respect that and give that baby the rights of life as well. So I can come to that agreement. So I wish we would come to a better standard like Roe versus Wade in Minnesota than what we currently have.
Pete, same question.
I'm pro-choice. And to be clear, it seems like there's a common talking point that the Republicans in Minnesota do support Roe v. Wade, when in the past that didn't seem to be the case. So I think women should have the right to make decisions about their body. And because it is only in statute, should the legislature change, you're going to see laws and things passed to try and change that, I have no doubt. It seems to be a lot of discussion, whether it be at the presidential debates or at the local level, about abortions right up to birth. The reality is those late-term abortions make up a very tiny % of abortions. And often those abortions are when new information is found, whether it's fetal viability, whether it's the health of the mother, or whether it was issues with delayed getting treatment up to that. So having good health care and physical and mental health care on the front end and the back end allow folks to actually get the treatment and get the help that they need. But I fully support a woman's right to choose, and we'll fight to keep that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Our final question, and could be a quick one here. Do you support legalizing sports betting in the state of Minnesota? Why or why not? In your mind, how should it work and how would it look? Pete?
I think that those conversations are being had. At first blush, I do support it. I think the last time it was introduced here, this last session, it did allow those to be managed by the tribes who do manage a lot of our gambling here in the state. To me, this doesn't necessarily change what that looks like. I think we have come a long ways. I think that if we are going to do it, having some of that, the revenue that's generated through that, go back to treat folks who have those addictions. I've seen, you see what happens when somebody has that addiction, whether it's to gambling, whether it's to drugs or alcohol, and it can absolutely take over and destroy their lives. So it shouldn't be something that should be done without some help and safeguards in place. But there's models out there, whether it's other states. I think we're one of just a few left that don't allow it in some way, shape, or form to build off of as we go forward.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, I guess I agree with Pete on something here. So I would endorse sports betting and that type of gambling. I think it's being done other places. It's being done online. It's being done in neighboring states. I think that we might as well. I think it's something that Minnesota can get revenue from to pay for programs. And also I think that, like Pete said, I think we should have a line where we have so much of that money put aside for gambling addictions to help people out. But I think it's something that's viable. I think it's doable, and I think it would be very beneficial to Minnesota and Minnesotans on different aspects of it. Because people are going to do it whether they can do it here or not. They'll find a place to go and do it.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. That concludes the 10 formal questions. Before Chuck and I wrap it up with some closing comments ourselves, each candidate will have now a minute and a half to provide closing comments. And we're just going to flip the order from how we started. And Mark, you will go first, and Pete, you'll follow him. So again, 90 seconds for closing comments. Mark, it's all yours.
I just want to touch on the three pillars of me running here. Public safety is the first one, if I can get to that here. The Democrats are going to tell you that the crime rate is down. It's not down. Maybe statistically it's down, but the major things that are higher are up. Like, let me just give you some numbers here. So I'm comparing 2019 to 2023 comparisons of crime, because 2019 was a pre-pandemic, pre-COVID year. I consider that the most stable time. So if you look at our bias crime rate, it's up 23% since between 2019 and 2023. Motor vehicle theft is up 36%. Violent crimes are up 48%. And murder is up 54%. So when you hear that the crime is down, it's not really down. Maybe for something like petty larceny or something. And fiscal responsibility, I touched on some of this before. Fiscal responsibility, we need to get our state in check, spending too much money. And of course, supporting our veterans. I'm a big supporter of veterans, and there are 300,000 vets in Minnesota, and I want to try to support those vets as much as I can, and go through like MACV and support different programs that support veterans. So.
Pete, minute and a half.
First off, thank you for the folks that hosted this. Thank you for everybody that came out, attended. Thank you for the folks who are going to watch online. With a lot of this, it's easy to point out the issues that we're facing. It's easy to live in our own bubbles and say that these are the most important things. These are what we need to do to be successful. So far in this campaign, I've knocked on thousands of doors throughout the district, had numbers of conversations with folks at their doors and in their living rooms about what's important to them. One of the big things that's important to them is figuring out how we get back to working together, whether that's working across the aisle, whether it's working together in our own communities, but that division of pitting one another against each other has got to stop. The other thing that keeps getting raised up is housing. It's access to health care folks can afford. It's making sure that our educational system is getting the resources that it needs. So it's easy to talk about these things. It's harder to deliver. There's a whole lot of different personalities down there. There's a whole lot of competing priorities. I think the folks should choose the person who they think can deliver the most for the folks in our community and the folks across the state. I think my skills and experience as a firefighter, as a union officer, as somebody who's served on nonprofits, as a youth sports coach, as a spouse of wife and daughters who are currently going through our educational system, not only do I bring the perspective, but I think I have the skills that will allow me to hit the ground running, create the relationships that need to be created to be successful, and ultimately deliver back for the folks here in Duluth and Minnesota. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you both. We are, again, right on time, so thank you for the respectful and informational dialogue this morning. Just a couple of reminders. This conversation has been recorded and will be on the DNT website. I know yesterday y'all had it up that afternoon, so very impressive. We'll share that as well at the DuluthChamber.com website. And again, on behalf of the Chamber and Duluth News Tribune, thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Garden for hosting us. We've got one more forum that will start about 15 minutes. We've got about a 15-minute break. As candidates wish, you're more than welcome to interact with them and to ask any follow-up questions you might have. But as we close up, please join me in giving a round of applause for our candidates. We really appreciate you taking the time. Well, once again, good morning, everyone. I think many of you were sticking around from last time, but if you're new, welcome. If you're back, welcome back. Thank you very much. My name is Dan Fanning. I'm the Vice President of the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the Duluth Chamber, our Chamber Foundation, our team, and our partners with the Duluth News Tribune, we're just so pleased to be able to host these public forums for free here at the Garden. Thank you to the Garden for hosting us. We really appreciate that. We really appreciate you taking time out of a beautiful Tuesday to join us and hear from these candidates. They're going to get an opportunity to introduce themselves in just a minute, but just want to start off by thanking both of you for being here. It takes courage to run for office. It takes a lot of courage, and we really appreciate your commitment to speak directly to the people and to join us on stage today. So thank you very much for that. Just a couple of reminders. This is being recorded. This will be available online both on the DNT website as well as the Duluth Chamber website. We'll share some pictures on our Facebook page and other social media as well. And again, just really appreciate you all taking the time to be here. So I'll kick it over to Chuck with the Duluth News Tribune.
Thanks, Dan. On behalf of the newspaper, welcome to our candidates, our incumbent, Representative Kozlowski from District 8B, and the Republican challenger, Sean Savala, who did I say it right again? Got it. Okay, good. Jeez. I don't know why I'm struggling with that all of a sudden, but I apologize. as we stated before, these forums are a great opportunity both for voters and for the candidates, for the voters to hear directly from the candidates about the issues as they make their decisions in the election on November 5th. Of course, early voting starts this Friday, so this is actually very, very timely. I want to mention also the Speak Your Piece folks are here, the civility and the expectations, no applause during the forum, no outbursts during the forum. No audible sighs, things like that. And at the end, we'll offer opportunity for applause for everyone. Candidates, I want to point out Kathy Burnt here in the front row at the front table. She is our timekeeper today. Your answers will be limited to a minute, and then we'll offer opportunities for rebuttals, for responses as you want. If you feel you're not getting enough time to express yourself, feel free to give me a nod, give me a wave. Something like that, that'd be just fine. We will begin by offering you each 1 minute to introduce yourselves, talk about why you're running, why you're seeking the position or running for re-election. We flipped a coin. Representative Kozlowski, you won, and you will speak first. At the end, Sean, you'll get the final word, or you'll get to speak first at the end. I apologize. Representative Kozlowski.
Well, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name's Leash, a.k.a. Alicia Kozlowski. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm really proud to be your state representative serving District 8B right now, and very excited to be here as the DFL labor endorsed, climate endorsed, reproductive justice, and many more endorsed candidate seeking re-election. I coined myself as a reluctant politician, as a rep who runs, and as an ultramarathoner. Having run my very successful first term, passing over 20 bills, many of which were bipartisan, delivering for the people of Duluth. You know, I started out in the streets of Lincoln Park, moving to first-gen college grad, to an MBA holder, to public office and business development and much more. And that really translated to wins across housing investments, childcare, infrastructure, and local projects that are going to make and improve the lives of Minnesotans and especially Duluthians right here. And that's why I'm here seeking your support in running to be able to serve our community again and into the future.
Thank you very much. Sean.
Hi, my name is Sean Savala, and thank you for having the forum. Thank you for coming today, everybody. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Duluth, in rural Duluth. I went to school here. I went to UMD, got a scholarship and went for 4 years, got my bachelor's of science, computer science. We got married here. My wife also grew up here. We met in high school. We moved down to the Twin Cities and had a couple great kids, started my own business in '98, and moved back here in 2017. A little bit more. In 2019, I went back to UMD to get my Master's of Science in Computer Science. I live in Kenwood. I have an office in downtown Duluth. I like to learn. I'm analytical. I approach problems as follows: identify a problem, seek solutions, seek input, make a decision, and go forward. The reason I'm running is I think we need smarter spending, we need smarter regulations, and we need to look out for the future generations coming up in Minnesota and look at Duluth in a micro level and Minnesota at a macro level. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you both. Now we're going to get to the 10 formal questions. As Chuck mentioned, we're going to ask for about a minute response each. As necessary, we'll have some time to work in rebuttals as necessary. But just to jump right in, question 1 is, if elected or re-elected, what would be your top priorities and what specifically would you want to accomplish for your district? And Sean, we'll start with you.
My top priorities are budget and spending. I'd like to see if we can put a cap on property taxes. Long term, I would like to get rid of property taxes altogether, but I know that's a long, winding road and it can't be accomplished right away. But I would like to put a cap on, put a little less pressure on the starters, up and starters, and the people that are retired. The other thing is regulations. I think we need to have a much better handle on what we're doing for regulations and stop driving businesses out of Minnesota, stop driving people out of Minnesota. And I think we need to get cheap, abundant, and redundant energy so that we're not creating a manufactured energy crisis in Minnesota. So those are my top 3 priorities in my first 2 years now. Pretty small term, right? 2 years. Those are a lot of things to accomplish in 2 years.
Thank you, Sean. Representative Kozlowski.
Thank you so much. Well, as the DFL trifecta back in 2014 said when we took office in my first term, they said, you know, when you have power, use it to do the most good for the most people who need it most. And what you'll see is that my priorities are Duluth's priorities through deep listening over the past 2 years and on the campaign trail now. And that is reflected in surveys and listening sessions in the Minnesota Values Project. Just in affordable housing, we have a housing crisis, and continuing to inject funds that are going to build housing across all income levels, that are going to grow our population and really eliminate the burden on our taxpayers or alleviate that. Inclusive economy and making life more affordable for everyday Duluthians and Minnesotans is something that, with the backing of the AFL-CIO and 100% rating, will work to strengthen our workers and their families and their economic security. Climate justice. Climate change is here and very much costing our governments, our residents, and their home and energy burden. And so looking for ways to, reduce our emissions and electrify everything and make it a successful transition into our just future. And health as well. So healthcare is something that we'll continue to tackle and rein in corporate greed as well.
Thank you both.
Thanks. You mentioned the trifecta, of course, the Senate, the House, Governor's office, all controlled by the DFL. Our question is, are you willing to rise above the party politics for the good of your constituents? And how can voters be assured, or how can they know that yours is a voice of compromise, cooperation? That's assuming you want it to be. Representative Kozlowski, we'll start with you.
Yeah, and honestly, I love this question because as somebody who's coming to this work, that I said it in my first run and in office and running for re-election, that I'm a coalition builder, that I'm a doer, that is an MBA holder. We learn a lot about log rolling and negotiating and compromising. And it's not about competing interests, but about, putting Duluth at the center, and what's good for Duluth is good for Minnesota. And so I really take that to heart, whether it's working with Republicans, with other Democrats across communities, that we don't have to be at odds with each other. And so you'll see that reflected in the work in the many bills that I mentioned that I passed. Infrastructure, bonding tour is one where you get on a bus and you spend a lot of time and you humanize each other, and it's not about the political show. It's not a game, it's people's lives. And so to the Critical Minerals Task Force, to tax credits for developers to make it easier to open and expand businesses, to the housing infrastructure bonds and workforce housing. Those are things that you'll continue to see me reach across the aisle and reach across colleagues to really deliver for our people.
Thanks. Sean Savala.
Yeah, this is a representative republic. This is not a democracy. This is about people representing people in their city. So yes, I don't look at party politics. I don't get guidance from the Republican Party. They have actually given me no guidance whatsoever. They give me guidelines of what they think our position should be, but they make it very clear. You support the positions that you think are important, and you package your own way. So I will not be having the party controlling what I'm doing. I'm here to represent everybody in Duluth, and that's not just people like me, it's people that aren't like me. It's important job of this is to have the empathy to understand where is somebody who's not like me coming from. If I'm a first-time home buyer, I used to be that a long time ago. I remember what that's like. I know what it's like to be in their shoes, and I know that's what they need to be looking out for. So to answer your question, no, I am not beholden to the party for my positions.
Not exactly the way I asked it, but thank you. It just as a way of following up, and I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but could each of you cite just one example when you did cooperate, when you did compromise, maybe didn't get something you wanted, but got something for the better good? Representative Kozlowski?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for it. I think about the committees that I serve, which is so often when Minnesotans tune in to the House floor, there's a lot of the political party rhetoric that might come out, but a lot of the work really happens in the committees and in the offices and those conversations. And I think about the worker protections that we were able to advance on the Labor Committee, for example, with meatpacking or for oil refineries, where we're able to, again, do that log rolling with each other, looking at companies that employ 100 versus 50 employees. That was something that with the meatpacking safety bill, we were able to make that compromise to make sure that folks who are running those businesses, mom and pops, that we're making it easier and not harder, but also we're not going to negotiate and compromise on making sure that workers get home to their families safe at night and that they're healthy and safe and able to continue to contribute and live their fullest lives.
Thanks. Sean, an example of a compromise you reached?
I did mention I'm married, right? 34 years. I come to compromises all the time. But joking aside, I've worked in a business for 26 years. My job as a software consultant is to work with people, work with businesses, work with business owners and the technicians that do the jobs. I have to do this all the time where you're working with disparate priorities. CEO wants one thing, CFO wants another one, the users want another one. I work with that all the time, and what we need to do is come together and come up with the best common solution that doesn't involve a lot of scope creep, because that's where your budget goes crazy, and can get the best solution for the most amount of people. And I think that really is the key for politics as well. Get the best solution for the most amount of people that you can.
Great, thank you. Dan.
Question 3 is around the state budget. As you know, last year there was a sizable state surplus. Not everyone was thrilled with how it was spent. The size of government increased about 40%. While some are pleased, some are not pleased. My question is, how do you feel that money was spent? Do you feel that was a wise investment? And if you're elected or re-elected, how do you plan to address this issue going forward next year? Not knowing if there will be a budget or not be a budget, but what's your general goals for the state budget going forward? And Sean, we'll start with you.
I think it was a tragedy what happened with the budget surplus spending and then increasing taxes another $10 billion. I mean, that is something that's untenable for people. My daughter is having problems buying groceries. My mom is telling me how much it costs to do everything. And then we take this money and we just go out and spend it. There was talk about giving it back to the people. I never saw that happen. I think it's good if you have a budget surplus to think, what was wrong with my budget so that I need to do some extra spending. Maybe we can shore up some things that we needed to work on, some bridges, infrastructure. But you've got to think about giving that money back. And then if you have such a big surplus, take a look at your budget, figure out, is it the right budget to have? And why are we increasing it so much? Why did we increase the size of the government 40% in a year? I think that's untenable. So the whole point, though, is to look at things, look at it smartly, and really know that you're talking about other people's money. Government doesn't produce money. They take money. Every bit they spend, they've taken from somebody else who's worked for it.
Thank you. Representative Kozlowski, same question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, you know, what I hear from Duluthians and Minnesotans is that people really want a government that has their back and not that holds us back, that people want to live in communities where we have access to good public schools, where we have safe and healthy connected communities, ample job opportunities, access to the outdoors, where they can live their fullest lives. And I think that we really need to talk about 3 words, which is disinvestment, surplus, and reinvestment. And I believe that we don't have a surplus so long as people in our communities are living on the streets, that people don't have access to good paying, thrivable wages. And so what we did with this budget in the surplus was put that money back into the hands of the people through targeted investments, increasing housing supply, tackling the cliff of childcare affordability, really looking at health and human services and funding, behavioral health services, to contracts for senior and home care workers. We also restored fairness to the tax code, where we have in Minnesota where we have some of the most Fortune 500s per capita, and yet everyday Minnesotans are the ones who are feeling the squeeze. And so these are the types of things that when we get back to the Capitol, we'll continue to work to make sure that we're improving the daily lives of Minnesotans.
Great, thank you both.
Thanks. This past session, even your session, is supposed to be all about a bonding bill. Of course, a bonding bill did not get done. Curious, in your mind, what happened? What prevented that from happening? And what were the biggest misses for District 3B? Representative Kozlowski, we'll begin with you.
Well, as a member of the Capital Investment and Bonding Committee, I can tell you that is something that coming into the Capitol after having not passed bonding bills until we passed our historic $2.6 billion bill in 2023, that we had a backlog of projects that continued to rise due to the cost of inflation and expenses from continued crumbling infrastructure. And so being able to deliver that, get funding for the airport, to get funding for veterans homes, to tackle childcare facilities and housing was critical. We went on a bonding tour to 71 communities. We received over $17 billion in requests across the state, and everything from water infrastructure to our 148th fighter base. All of these things didn't happen because we couldn't reach an agreement because one party took the football and went home. We debated for 52 hours on the House floor when we could have been spending time putting together a bill that benefits all of our districts and really meets the needs of Minnesotans. And so when you see us go back to the Capitol, I am deeply committed to working across those lines. As a rookie legislator, I spent a lot of time working with Republicans and understand that on the House side, we passed that bonding bill. It didn't pass in the Senate this year. We need to get that done.
Thanks. Sean Savala?
why didn't it pass? It's politics. It's people that can't get along and come to a compromise. We see a lot of infighting. We see a lot of people that have their agendas. This is typical, and this isn't going to stop. But we need to have people that are there that know how to compromise and know how to work with other people to get this done. It's a very important thing to get the bonding bill. What Lisha's talked about, all important things. The fact that it couldn't get done is a failure on the government's part this last session, and I look at it as everybody that was involved takes a little bit of responsibility for it.
Good, thank you. Yeah.
If I do a quick follow-up to that one,
Yeah,
Chuck,
please
it's your question. You mentioned a couple of the chamber's top priorities, so selfishly I'm just going to harp on that if you don't mind, but I know you've both expressed a couple of your support for a couple of these projects. But when you talk about things like the airport control tower and the 148th Fighter Wing new hangars, not only are they important for a region, but there's also a federal component there where we know we've secured some federal dollars, but they want the state to see some skin in the games. And we've been going for 3 or 4 years on a couple of these projects. If they're not passed next year, not to go doomsday, but there is a risk that we could lose millions and millions and millions of federal dollars if the state does not do their job and pass the bonding bill. So my question is, how can we kind of pick up some of the momentum that we had the last couple of years and ensure that a bill actually does get passed? And would you essentially begin with the end in mind thinking that that would be sort of the start of the conversation of some of those projects that have already had that momentum? And I think we'll start with Sean, if you, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think we do that by expressing how important it is to everybody, especially the people in our party and the other party, reaching across the aisle and making sure that they know what is at stake and what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. So it's a matter of getting together with people, having those conversations, and making sure that they understand the importance of it to both the community here, to Duluth, to Minnesota itself, and to the United States.
Right, and I appreciate the follow-up. You know, last session was super important, and we talked about bonding in terms of being a supplemental year, being a bonding year every other year, that the bonding bill was the thing that really needed to happen. And when we look at the reasons that it didn't happen, it wasn't put into a global agreement between the party leaders from the GOP and the DFL. And so I think, you know, before day one that we should be already hitting the ground running, getting that into a global agreement for what is going to be the target. Also to be very clear that we have federal dollars on the line. You know, we put money in the IRA, IIJA, and we know that these matches are critical or we might lose out on them. And what we need to do is make sure that when we get back down to the Capitol, that that's our first priority and that we reach that agreement and that we don't let things like the Equal Rights Amendment stall us out from putting folks to work. That right now we should be putting shovels in the ground and having ribbon cuttings and getting those projects moving, but yet we're adding to the $166 billion backlog of infrastructure needs.
Thank you both very much. It's a good segue to our next question. I apologize, I flipped the order on that one. I should have had you ask first, sorry. But we'll get back on track here. So question 5 is a follow-up in the sense that talking about state spending, it's about public education. As you know, especially around the pandemic, some of the schools lost some of the funding that they were using for the pandemic relief. Once those funds ended, that did create some hardships in schools. There was an increase in public education funding last year. My question is, do you feel like that's enough? What more could the state do? And if you were elected or re-elected, what do you plan to do around public education? Sean, we'll start with you.
Yeah, public education is a real tricky one. We spend a lot of money, probably the most money on education, I believe. And we need to get some results from it. And I think we would have to take a look at everything that came out, what the schools are budgeting, what they need, and then maybe try to take away some of these mandates that we've imposed on the schools so they don't have to spend their money on things they don't care about or they don't need. I think that education should be geared towards educating the students to live a life. So I think, honestly, I think we should have less about some of the social issues that we're teaching kids and more about things like maybe gun safety, maybe how to do your taxes. If a person comes away from school and can't do basic reading, can't do basic math, and can't figure out how to run their life, we've failed as a state in education, and I think we've seen that in the recent years. We need to get back to fundamentals, teach these kids to at least read. If you can read, you can live your whole life learning more and more.
Thank you. Representative Kozlowski, same question.
Thank you. You know, education, as somebody who comes from a long line of educators who worked in higher education myself, you'd know my grandmas and aunties in Myers-Wilkins Elementary School, you know, here with a generational commitment that has preceded me in office and will continue. This budget session, we prioritize massive investments. Education is the #1 area that the state spends on the budget, and we have to be honest that we've had 20 years of disinvestment and that we are at a time where we're plugging holes. We have put $16 million into the Duluth School District alone over the next 2 years, and then index that to inflation to make sure that the funding is keeping pace with the needs. And we've filled about 1/3 of it, and we have more to do. We did a lot of different programming to make sure that, our teachers' working conditions are our students' learning conditions. So things like making sure that hourly school workers have access to unemployment insurance, to filling our teacher shortage, to funding behavioral health and student needs. One of the things that I passed was Indigenous Education for All, and making sure that we have reporting included in there for ongoing funding, and really looking at that. So much more to talk about, but we'll be committed to doing that.
Thank you. Sean's asked for rebuttal, so we'll give you both 1 more minute each.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about these mandates, the unemployment. These things all cost money. They cost the school boards money, and they're not funded. We can't continue to increase the cost to the schools and expect them to deliver quality education. So when we look at the mandates that we're applying down, and we're doing these mandates on, unemployment, and other funding that they give one time, we've got to look at the long-term effects of that. Duluth schools are facing a budget shortfall for next year. They're cutting their budget. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep throwing them money, giving them mandates, not giving them a way to fund it, and then expecting them to come up with quality education.
Representative Kozlowski.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just to kind of build off of what I was mentioning is that, when we go back to the Capitol and talking with our amazing teams on the education committees, with our labor unions, with our educators and students and families, we know that strong schools make strong communities, make strong workforce, make strong futures. And so looking at how that ongoing dedicated funding is going, we built into the base budget those increases. And I think we need to continue to look at, the funding formula and fixing that on levies, that we have more work around the 5th tier millionaire tax, for example, where if we have the wealthiest Minnesotans paying their fair share of taxes, that we can fund good public education, that we can have students have full bellies and full hearts and make it easier for them to learn when they come into the classrooms, that we have teachers and educators who are healthy and supported in their schools. And these are the things that Minnesotans want us to come together and work hand in glove and really tackle.
Great, thank you both.
Thanks. Another big issue for not just Minnesota, but I think the entire country, Duluth in particular, and Eastern Duluth, where you represent or would represent, is housing. Of course, creating housing affordable to all income levels, not just low-income housing. Curious how you feel or what you feel the state should be doing next to help create more housing at the local level. Leash, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, this is a question that I'm very excited about. Serving on the Housing Committee, I was also the Minnesota Housing Legislative Champion of the Year, which I take to heart. In our first term, when we came in and we had $1 billion investment, we said, go big so that everybody can go home. And then last year we had a much smaller target with a supplemental budget of $10 million, and a little goes a long way. We did everything from doing more rental as well as more home ownership opportunities. We know that we have a crisis of 100,000 plus units gap to fill, and so we really injected funds. Here in Duluth, I helped to secure over $50 million. That's quadrupling single-family homes and apartments, transitional and permanent supportive housing. We have many people who are cost-burdened, and although hardworking Minnesotans are working their tails off to put a roof over their head and food on the table, we know that over 1/4 of them are struggling because the rent is too high. And the state has a huge role in continuing to be a strong, stable, steady partner in funding and policy.
Thank you. Sean Savala on creating housing.
I think it's important to look at a couple things. We have 80,000 illegal immigrants in this state. One thing is to get rid of them. We free up some housing. One of the things that Representative Kozlowski introduced was called the Missing Middle Act, which stripped zoning rights for housing from cities and gave it to the state level so they could build high-density housing in any place in the city. I don't think that's the right thing to do. Your most basic rights come from the local government. Your most effective voting choice comes from the local government and making decisions of where you live. I think we need to look at property taxes to lower that, to make it more affordable for people to get housing. And then I think we need to I think we need to lower energy prices to also make it more affordable for housing. The government is not responsible for creating housing for people, it's creating the environment so that housing can exist. And that's my position on how government should work. Make everything lower priced, give them good infrastructure, the housing will come, and people will be able to live in that area.
Thank you. Representative Kozlowski, you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you so much. You know, as a third-generation Mexican-American, I think that it's very important that we put the focus back on where we should be, which is instead of trying to ban people, who, by the way, are hardworking Minnesotans with the highest labor participation and contributing actually to our tax base, that would be detrimental to have anybody removed from our communities, that we should be focused on banning homelessness and making sure that we're tackling the racial disparities in home ownership in Minnesota. One of the bills that I was so proud to carry was the first-gen home ownership and counseling to help the 27,000 Minnesotans of color who are ready to step up into home ownership. That, yeah, zoning reforms is actually built on racist practices of exclusionary zoning is not only hurting black and brown Minnesotans who have been boxed out of communities and job opportunities and education opportunities, but is now hurting us because developers and cities and communities with rising costs, challenges in particular in Duluth, we're a very rocky community, it costs more, are actually holding us back instead of bringing us forward. And those are the types of things that I will continue to work on and make sure that Minnesota is a place where every single resident, every single person has a place to call home.
Good. Sean Savila, final word on housing?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I challenge that people of color are being excluded from communities. We have a lot of laws that prevent that. So if we have examples of that, if we're getting those brought to our attention, we should be handling that. We don't need special laws for special people. We need laws for everybody in this state. And I want to talk about the illegal immigrants here. These are citizens of other countries. Now, a lot of them are hardworking. That's great. Some of them aren't. That's bad. But they are ultimately citizens of other countries who funnel their money back to their states or countries. And when it's over, when we run out of money, we run out of food here, they will go back to their countries and we'll be left with a mess. So this is less about targeting any certain group of people. I don't care where they're from. There's a legal process, and illegal immigration into this country, into this state, is an insult to the people who spent years and hard work and lawyers and fees coming in legally. I work with many of them in my software consulting business. India, England, Iran, Pakistan, everywhere. And it's insulting to them that people are left to stay here without going through the system that we've put in place.
Thanks.
Question 7 is a bit of a continuation on housing and possibly immigration, but it's really around population growth and change. We see other regional hubs like Rochester and parts of the Twin Cities consistently growing. We have seen a little bit of progress here in Duluth metro area, but we know there's probably more we can do. There's more we want to do to particularly grow that tax-based growth. As a legislature, if you're elected or if you're reelected, what do you plan to do to help promote some of those good-paying jobs in the Northland, bring more people? We know housing's part of that, of course, but even beyond housing, what more could the state do? What role could you play as a state legislature to help that growth in our area? Sean, we'll start with you.
Okay, let's talk about regulations. Regulations are driving the businesses out of this state. We look at mining regulations, we look at the Prove It First Act. That basically grandfathers in any mining companies that are here and stops any mining altogether. And we need that. Duluth benefits greatly from mining up north. We need the minerals. We need to have people with jobs up there, good-paying jobs. And I think Minnesota is the second state with the most natural resources in it. I think if we do mine those, we should be able to get a cut of it as a state. But regulations is a big thing. And then the taxation. We are the highest taxed state for businesses, for corporations. It's ridiculous. It's moving people out. I know personally 2 people that said they are moving out of the state because they can't afford this. They had this Uber law to make employees or to make contractors employees of companies. And so Minnesota companies aren't hiring independent contractors anymore because they're afraid they're going to be changed and turned into employees. So getting rid of these regulations and taking care of taxes is a big part of it.
Thank you, Sean. Representative Kozlowski, same question.
Yeah, this is an area that I spend a lot of time both dreaming and sleeping and working on as a member of the Economic Development Committee. We really work hand in hand with our business community, with industry leaders, with workers, in making sure that Minnesota is the best place to raise a family, to start and own a business, to live and work and play. And you might have seen that Minnesota ranks 6th in some national rankings, not just around starting and opening a business, but also around quality of life and infrastructure. And so some of the things that we're really doing to drive targeted investments through our committee and across others, is really supporting our small businesses. Some of the bills that I was proud to carry was $8 million for blight mitigation, as well as to support small business startups and support entrepreneurs at all stages. We also had the Drive for 5 and really looking at our workforce challenges, making sure that folks who are underemployed or dislocated or transitioning to manufacturing, to our care fields, to technology and education, that we're using our bonding bill to make sure that our water infrastructure supports the needs of businesses and expansion and so much more. And these are the types of things that I will continue to make sure that Duluth and Minnesota is the best place to live.
Good. Thank you both.
Thank you. Our next question on copper nickel mining is almost a good follow-up to the question there on economic development. Just very point blank, I want to ask each of you, are you confident that it's something that can be done safely, or are you among those who feel it's so risky Minnesota shouldn't even consider mining proposals, or maybe something in between? Representative Kozlowski, will begin with you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Climate justice, as I mentioned, is not only a top priority for myself, for our district, but also for the state legislature, and an area where we've taken massive investments and policy advances to move us towards our clean energy future. And when we talk about mining, when we talk about industries like helium, as was discovered this past year, we have the Critical Minerals Task Force that was bipartisan that I led, that is going to be looking at standing up a whole new industry and regulations that are going to go permitting. I think that we really need to talk about trust, about community voice and power, and also worker safety. And so, as with any policy that comes across my desk, I believe that these are starting points and not finish lines. And whether it's Prove It First, which since my time in office has not gotten a hearing, but that labor leaders and climate justice and electeds have come together to continue those conversations, to make advances with the Minnesota Permitting Reform Act this year, that we're making it less costly, less burdensome, but also putting community voice and power back in the hands of the people, are where I will continue to lean into and also bridge those gaps and bring folks together.
Thank you. Sean Savala?
Yeah, so I consider myself a Teddy Roosevelt kind of Republican. I'm very much an outdoors person. I love the outdoors. I want to make sure we're all clean. We have a number of regulations in place to make sure mining is safe. And I think any kind of proposal that we would have to guarantee that we do have some safeguards in place so that we can do mining safely. They have to, the prove it first should be prove it with your proposals and then back it up. I do like the idea of having, if we could do it, a Minnesota company that was doing the mining, if not a Minnesota company, a U.S. company. And why is that? Because then we can hold them accountable. If we have a foreign company coming out here and doing this kind of mining, and they screw up big, they can just pull out and go. So I think we do need to take a look at mining properly and then hold people accountable if there is a problem.
Thanks.
Question 9 is around abortion and reproductive rights. As you know, there's been a lot of conversation around this issue for many, many years, especially this last couple of years with the Supreme Court's recent ruling. What's your views on the issue, and what role do you feel like you should play if elected or re-elected down at the legislature in St. Paul? And we'll start with you, Sean.
So I've been looking at the abortion laws, and I believe right now, I can tell you right now, that they're too liberal. 8 and 9 months is too far along, I think, a reasonable amount. The Roe versus Wade, I thought, was a good idea to remove it from the federal level and get it to the state level. I think states need to make that right. And like I said before, your local policies are the things that you can use to make most difference in your life. So if it's at a state level, you have a much more direct response to it. I don't support outright banning. I have a compromise solution. There's a legal and a moral issue here. Legally, I think it should go to 3 months. Morally, I think you try not to do it at all. I would like to do not fund abortions. I would like to fund places that are actually helping women have their babies if they choose to have them. And then hopefully we don't have any abortions because we've educated people, we've given people the option to not have an abortion. But I do believe it's a good thing to have taken away from the federal government, given to the state level so that we can make those decisions here. This is a 2-year term. This is not my high priority on this list. So when I'm going to be working on things, it's going to be more about budget, regulations, and energy. But those are my thoughts on abortion.
Thank you. Representative Kozlowski.
Thank you. As an Indigenous person, I understand that sovereignty is everything, and without it, you don't have a whole lot. And so when it comes to bodily autonomy, to gender freedoms, these are the things that Minnesotans, that Duluthians have made very clear are important and critical to a good life. To not have politicians who are in the way of life-saving, very important medical conversations that should be happening with your family and with your loved ones and with yourself, and not with us elected officials in that space. We took decisive action at the legislature to really protect and defend our access to abortion care, which, was rolled back, that my grandmother had more rights than my daughter had today. Until we took that action at the state capitol. And we need to continue to press on and do more. That's why I support the Equal Rights Amendment. It's something that keeps me awake at night that we didn't get done. That is going to be a top priority next session because it will put the trust back into the people. It's going to bring the question to a constitutional amendment for you all to determine the trajectory of our future. And that will be around abortion rights and cementing that into our Constitution. It will be also around IVF and contraception. These are things that we need to expand access to trans protections, and being able to have the fullest ability to be yourself is so important.
Great, thank you. And back to Chuck for the final question.
Thanks, Dan. Our final issue that we want to ask about is legalizing sports betting. One of those issues that keeps coming up in the legislature, keeps getting shot down. I think it keeps dying on details is my summation from just watching from a distance here. Curious, do you support legalizing sports betting in Minnesota? Why or why not? And in your mind, how should it work and how should it look? Representative Kozlowski, we'll begin with you.
Yeah, sports betting is definitely the bill that died many deaths at the state capitol and has come before the legislature and will come back again. I actually think that sports betting, when it comes down to it, is really about tribal exclusivity and gaming. It's something that I didn't hear a ton when I was door knocking on my way into the Capitol, but once I got there, I tell you what, it was nonstop. People care about it for many different reasons. As an Indigenous person, as a state of Minnesota who is respecting tribal sovereignty, making sure that those tools and that determination for tribes to have economic sovereignty is important. And also we need to balance public health. Problem gaming is something that folks are concerned about. But the Minnesota Gaming Commission made a decision to allow historic horse racing, which is essentially copies slot machines and competes with the tribes wrongfully. And so I believe that we need to make that fix, but we need to do it in a way that balances public health, that brings this industry into a legal market, which is already happening across other states, and also takes care of our youth and make sure that we're not causing further public health crises with problem gaming.
Good, thank you. Sean Savala.
I don't have strong feelings for gambling one way or another. I think I'm not a champion of it. It's not something I want to carry the water for. It was something I would listen to. I know there's downfalls to it. There's bringing in crime. There's bringing in addiction here. So there's problems with bringing in gambling, and I think we really need to take a really close look at it if we're going to do it and do it right. I'm kind of surprised this is the last question. I mean, we've got a whole section on people getting a universal basic income. They're giving people that are 18 to 24 $1,000 a month that aren't citizens necessarily. That's the only criteria, 18 to 24, and you don't have a permanent place to house yourself. That doesn't mean you're not living with your friend. You can live with your friend. As long as they didn't say you can stay here forever, you can get $1,000 a month in St. Louis and Hennepin County. We're gifting educations to people that make under $80,000 a year. That's setting them up for a lifetime of taxation to pay for other people to get that education. They don't necessarily need that education. So I kind of take a segue off of the taxation or the gambling, just to say I'm kind of surprised we haven't talked about that yet.
Thank you both.
Well, that's a good segue to closing comments, which you can use however you'd like to. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes. We're going to just flip the script on how we started. Sean, you're going to start first. Representative Kozlowski, you will finish. You'll both have about 90 seconds. We're right on time, so kudos to our timekeeper once again. If you could keep your comments to just 1.5 minutes. And Sean, we'll begin with you.
I'll try. I'm sorry. I mean, there's a couple other things we didn't talk about here. Trying to turn Minnesota into a sanctuary state, the North Star Act, that horrible legislation. This is something that's going to ruin this state. Regulations around child care and nursing homes, unfunded mandates for nursing homes. How many have gone out of business in the last year? How hard is it to get child care? And how much does it cost? When I was working, we had our second child, and we made the decision for my wife to stay home because we couldn't afford it. We were going to make $100 every 2 weeks, I think, if she was working to put our kids in daycare, and it's worse now. So I'm just going to wrap up and say, thank you all for coming today. Thank you for the forum. Really appreciate it. I think we have totally different approaches to the way the government should work and what it's for. I think it should be something that helps the people but isn't paternalistic. I don't think it's something that we need to hold everybody's hand. And I think individual achievement is where we should be looking to help people, make sure they can make their decisions and they can do what they need, and they can build themselves up in anything they can. So remember, I just wanted to say this. If you typically vote blue and you think that what I'm saying makes sense, you can still vote for me. I just wanted to tell you that. It'll be our little secret, but you can still do it. So I'm just going to say thank you again. If you guys see me out on the street, you'll see me running around the neighborhoods. I'm all over the place. Say hi, throw me a shaka. I'll throw it back. We'll get a little low-high attitude happening in Minnesota. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Representative Kozlowski, 1.5 minutes closing statement.
All right, well, this flew by, and again, I'm so grateful for everybody that took the time to come here in person, that's tuning in online from home or work, wherever you're at. As an ultra-marathoner, as the rep who runs, I was so honored to be able to do the hard yards for Duluth in my first term, and I look forward to continuing to burn that line down from Duluth to St. Paul and back again, continuing with the same pace, with the same courage and tenacity, really to deliver for the people of Duluth. I come here again, reaffirm that I believe that we believe Duluth and Minnesota is a place where everybody should have a place where they can lay their head at night, where we have access to clean drinking water, where we have affordable and quality health care, where we have ample opportunity to public education and to be able to build for our future. And I think that right now we are in a moment where we have a clear distinction. And sometimes it's pit as one of two choices, but I also believe that we are actually, the thing is inevitable is that we are creating the way for the future that we want in our hands. And as Duluthians, we get to make that determination when we go to the polls, but it doesn't stop there. And I committed to being a movement leader, and you will continue to see me working side by side with you. Whether you vote for me or not, whether you endorse me or not, I will continue to fight with and for you and for the things that you love. And so I want everybody to know that this future belongs to us, but it's only going to happen if we do things that are urgent, intentional, actionable, and equitable, and that is what you're getting when you send me back to St. Paul, and I'll never stop fighting with and for you.
Well, again, on behalf of the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber Foundation, and our partners at Duluth News Tribune, thank you all for joining us today. This concludes our forums for this year. We do have this room for a little bit longer, so if you do want to stick around and mingle with the candidates or each other, please feel free. But again, if you could, just a couple of reminders before I say that. This was recorded and will be both on the Duluth News Tribune website as well as the Duluth Chamber website. We'll share the links on our social media as well. But in conclusion, if you could please join me with a round of applause for these candidates. We really appreciate their time and their service. So thank you both.
Thank you for listening to Duluth News Tribune Minute. After more than 3 years and over 1,000 episodes, we decided to bring this podcast to a close. It's been a privilege to deliver local news to you each and every day, and we appreciate the support from our listeners over the years. While this is the end of our daily audio updates, we're proud of the role we've played in keeping our community informed. As always, you can find all of our reporting updated 24/7 at DuluthNewsTribune.com. We'll also publish a print edition twice a week, and we publish an electronic version of a daily paper 7 days a week. To subscribe, go to DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Please remember to check out our other podcasts, available on our websites and for free wherever you also get this podcast. Thanks again for listening.